A stranger in the rain. The steady drizzle painted Seattle's streets in glistening reflections, giving the city its timeless, melancholic charm. Inside Emerald Coffee, James Chen sat by the window, watching droplets race down the glass. His cold Americano sat untouched, a faint swirl of cream still visible on its surface. He had been stationed here for weeks, tasked with monitoring new alien arrivals. Despite months of practice, the sight of extraterrestrial beings walking Earth's streets still made him pause. The cafe door chimed softly, announcing a new arrival. James glanced up, his instincts sharpening. A tall, elegant figure entered, undoubtedly alien. Her iridescent violet skin shimmered faintly under the warm cafe lights, and her almond-shaped, opalescent eyes scanned the room with a mix of curiosity and unease. She was Vexian, one of the many species introduced to humanity through the Galactic Council. Her movements were cautious, almost timid, as she approached the counter. She hesitated, her gaze flickering across the menu board. The barista waited patiently, accustomed to guiding alien visitors through Earth's peculiarities. Yet, the Vexian seemed uncertain. "Perhaps a recommendation," she asked softly, her voice carrying a melodic quality unique to her species. Before James could stop himself, he spoke up. "The lavender honey latte is pretty good. It might remind you of something from home, like Kera tea." Her head turned sharply, surprise flashing across her face. "You know of Kera tea?" she asked, her voice a mix of astonishment and delight. James nodded, his expression neutral. "I've read about Vexian culture." She smiled then, a delicate yet dazzling expression that transformed her face. "I am Kera," she said. "May I join you? It is rare to meet a human so familiar with our ways." James hesitated but gestured toward the empty seat. "I'm James." As Kera settled into the chair, James studied her. Her diplomatic badge gleamed faintly from the folds of her robes, its holographic seal flawless. Yet, his instincts warned him that something wasn't quite right. She ordered the recommended drink and sipped it delicately, her eyes watching him over the rim of the cup. "The rain," she murmured, her gaze drifting to the window. "It reminds me of the seasonal storms on Vexor Prime. Your world has such vibrant weather." "Seattle's famous for it," James replied, keeping his tone light. Their conversation meandered, touching on Earth's culture, human habits, and Galactic Council events. Yet, beneath her seemingly innocent curiosity, James detected an underlying pattern. Kera's questions occasionally veered into topics like Earth's military organization and orbital defense systems. Her transitions were seamless, but to James, they felt rehearsed. "You must find our ways strange," she said suddenly, her voice carrying a hint of vulnerability. "I am still learning human customs, and I fear I may sometimes seem too forward." James smiled faintly. "Curiosity isn't a bad thing. We humans are just as curious about the Vexians." Her face lit up, though her opalescent eyes flickered briefly with something more. "Perhaps you would allow me to show you more of my culture. Would you join me for dinner tomorrow at my residence? I could prepare traditional Vexian dishes." James raised an eyebrow. The invitation was unexpected but intriguing. Her expression seemed genuine, almost shy, yet his instincts whispered otherwise. If she was playing a role, she was playing it masterfully. "I'd like that," he said finally. As she handed him a sleek data chip with her address, her hand brushed his lightly. "I am glad," she said softly. "Until tomorrow." James watched as she left, her gait graceful but more confident than before. When she thought she was out of sight, her demeanor shifted subtly, the timid air fading. He leaned back in his seat, a faint smile tugging at his lips. The game had begun, and both players were already making their moves. Somewhere in the shadows of the city, a storm far more dangerous than the rain was brewing. The rain had subsided by the time James arrived at the address etched onto the sleek data chip. The towering high-rise was a blend of Earth's modern architecture and alien designs. The building's surface shimmered faintly, catching the light like liquid metal. It stood out even in Seattle's eclectic skyline. James stepped into the private elevator, his concealed scanner subtly confirming the absence of immediate threats. Yet, he knew better than to trust appearances. As the elevator climbed, his mind replayed his encounter with Kera. Her invitation, her questions, none of it felt casual. She was fishing for something, and tonight, he intended to find out what. The elevator doors opened directly into Kera's residence. The entrance hall was breathtaking. The walls seemed alive, shifting colors like the surface of a soap bubble. The air carried a faint floral aroma, unfamiliar yet pleasant. Along the walls, transparent cases displayed artifacts of both human and alien origin. "Welcome, James," Kera said, emerging from a side door. She wore more casual attire, though it still adhered to the flowing, elegant style of her people. Her smile was warm, but her eyes watched him closely, studying his every reaction. "Your home is impressive," James said, gesturing to a display case. "Is that a Centurion war mask? Those are incredibly rare." Kera's eyes widened briefly, a flicker of surprise she quickly masked. "You recognize it? Most humans would assume it's a decorative piece." "I've always had an interest in alien artifacts," James replied smoothly. He refrained from mentioning that his knowledge came from countless intelligence briefings. His gaze lingered on the case's security field, military grade. It was far beyond what a simple diplomat would use. Kera gestured toward the dining room. "Dinner is almost ready. Please, make yourself comfortable." The dining room was equally stunning, offering a panoramic view of the city skyline. The table was set with precision, each dish a work of art. Aromas of alien spices and herbs filled the air. Kera poured a glass of pale, shimmering liquid and handed it to James. "Kvill wine," she said. "It's quite similar to Earth wines, though with a slightly floral finish." James accepted the glass, holding it to the light. "Impressive collection of vintages you have," he remarked, his tone casual. Their conversation over dinner was lively but layered. Kera asked seemingly innocent questions about Earth space programs, military traditions, and human adaptability. James answered carefully, offering enough to keep her engaged but withholding critical details. "You humans are remarkable," Kera said, setting her glass down. "Your ability to adapt, to learn so quickly, it's fascinating. For such a young species, your achievements are extraordinary." James smiled faintly, noting the subtle emphasis on young species. "We've had to learn fast. Space isn't exactly forgiving." Kera's expression softened, and for a moment, she seemed genuinely curious. "Do you ever wonder what lies beyond the limits of human exploration? Beyond the Galactic Council?" "All the time," James admitted, watching her reaction carefully. "But I'm sure you have your own theories." She tilted her head, her opal eyes gleaming. "Perhaps. But tonight, I'd rather learn more about your world." After dinner, Kera led James to what she called her relaxation chamber. The room was bathed in soft, rippling blue light, creating an almost underwater effect. The furniture seemed to grow organically from the floor, typical of Vexian bioarchitecture. James couldn't help but notice how the room's dimensions matched those of standard Vexian interrogation chambers. His every sense was on high alert, though his demeanor remained calm. "More wine?" Kera asked, holding up the bottle. "Sure," James said, watching as she poured. Her movements were graceful but deliberate, almost calculated. As they sipped their drinks, the conversation turned sharper. Kera's questions became more pointed, her curiosity about Earth's orbital defenses more evident. James deflected smoothly, his answers vague but not dismissive. "You're quite skilled at avoiding direct answers," Kera said, her tone light but with an edge. "It's almost as if you're hiding something." James chuckled softly. Or maybe I'm just cautious. Humans value their privacy, remember? Kera's smile didn't reach her eyes. The tension in the room thickened, the rippling blue light casting shifting shadows on the walls. Tell me, James, she said finally, setting her glass down. What do you know about the recent disappearances of military personnel from your orbital defense stations? The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. James's heart rate quickened, but his expression remained neutral. I'm afraid I don't follow, he said carefully. Disappearing personnel sounds like a serious issue. Has the Galactic Council been informed? Kera leaned forward, her gaze unyielding. Come now, Commander Chen. Let's not pretend. You're here for the same reason I am. James froze, the title hitting him like a bolt of lightning. He had taken every precaution to maintain his cover, yet Kera had seen through it. The game had changed, and the stakes were higher than ever. Interesting, James said, setting his glass aside. You've done your homework. So have you, Kera countered, her voice dropping to a whisper. But the question is, Commander, who will make the first move? The walls pulsed with a deeper blue, and James heard the faint hum of systems activating. Somewhere in the room, unseen defenses were coming online. The game had officially begun. The walls of Kera's relaxation chamber shifted, the soft ripples of blue light growing darker and sharper. James sat motionless, his senses heightened. Somewhere within the room, unseen systems hummed to life. The faintest change in air pressure signaled sealed exits. He knew what this meant, a trap had been sprung. Kera leaned back, her elegant demeanor giving way to a more predatory edge. Her opal eyes gleamed in the dim light, studying him like a hawk. So, Commander Chen, she said, her voice smooth and cutting. You've played your part well, but we both know why you're really here. James smiled faintly, his tone calm despite the rising tension. I could say the same about you. The innocent alien act was convincing, but let's drop the pretense. Why don't you tell me what this is really about? Kera chuckled, a low, musical sound that carried an undercurrent of menace. Straight to the point. I like that. Very human. She gestured to the walls, and a section shimmered before revealing a hidden control panel. Her fingers danced across it, and a series of holographic displays illuminated the room. James's eyes narrowed as he took in the images. Military bases, orbital defense stations, and strategic locations across Earth. Each display was overlaid with detailed schematics and surveillance footage, some of which he knew were classified at the highest levels. This wasn't just reconnaissance, it was preparation. Impressive, James said, leaning back casually. I have to admit, I expected something more subtle. You're not hiding your intentions very well. Kera tilted her head, her smile sharpening. Subtlety is overrated when the stakes are this high. Your species is unexpected. Most new members of the Galactic Council are naive, eager to please. But humans? You're different. Resourceful. Resilient. Dangerous. Flattery won't get you far, James replied, his eyes scanning the displays for any weaknesses in the setup. If we're so dangerous, why not leave us alone? Kera's smile faded, replaced by a cold, calculating expression. Because danger breeds opportunity. You see, Commander, humanity's rapid rise has unsettled the balance of power. Some of us find that intriguing. Others see it as a threat. And where do you stand? James asked, his voice steady. Let's just say I'm curious, Kera said, tapping a final command into the panel. The displays shifted, revealing live feeds from Earth's orbital defense grid. Your defenses are impressive, but they're not infallible. We've identified vulnerabilities. It's only a matter of time before someone exploits them. James stood, his movements deliberate. And you thought dinner and a show would be enough to extract more information? Kera stepped closer, her gaze locked on his. "You're not here by accident, Commander. You wanted to be found. That much is clear. The question is, why?" James allowed himself a small smile. "Let's just say I have my reasons." The tension between them was electric, the room thick with unspoken threats. Kera's hand hovered near the control panel, her posture shifting as though preparing for a confrontation. James mirrored her stance, his mind calculating escape routes and countermeasures. "Shall we stop playing games, then?" Kera said, her voice cold and precise. "You know who I am, and I know who you are. Let's lay our cards on the table." James nodded, his expression unreadable. "Fine by me. But remember, Kera, you're not the only one with a hand to play." The lights in the room dimmed further, the hum of the systems growing louder. Somewhere, a hidden drone activated, its faint were barely audible. Kera gestured to the displays. "These vulnerabilities you see, they're more significant than you realize. If exploited, Earth's defenses would crumble. But I'm not your enemy, Commander." "Then what are you?" James asked, his tone skeptical. "An ally," Kera said, her voice softening. "At least, I could be. There are forces within the Galactic Council who seek to use humanity as a pawn or destroy you outright. I have other plans." James raised an eyebrow. "You expect me to trust you after this elaborate performance?" "I expect you to see the bigger picture," Kera replied, her tone firm. "The Council is fractured, Commander. The factions vying for control are dangerous, and humanity is the wild card. If we work together, we can ensure your survival, and mine." James considered her words, his mind racing. He didn't trust her, but there was a kernel of truth in what she said. The Galactic Council's politics were complex, and humanity's rapid ascent had undoubtedly disrupted the status quo. "Let's say I believe you," James said carefully. "What's your endgame?" Kera smiled, a glimmer of genuine emotion breaking through her icy facade. "Survival, Commander. For both our species." The room fell silent, the tension easing slightly. James knew this was only the beginning of a far more dangerous game. For now, he had no choice but to play along. "All right," he said finally. "Let's see where this goes." Kera extended her hand, and after a brief hesitation, James shook it. The game was on, and both players were fully aware of the stakes. The handshake lingered, a silent truce born of mutual necessity rather than trust. Kera's opal eyes reflected the dim light, studying James with an intensity that was equal parts intrigue and calculation. James remained stoic, every instinct on high alert. Whatever alliance they had just forged, it was as fragile as glass. "Follow me," Kera said, her voice low. She turned toward a wall, placing her hand against its surface. The bioarchitecture responded, parting to reveal a concealed passage. "If we're to work together, there's something you need to see." James hesitated briefly before following. His steps were measured, his eyes scanning every detail of the narrow corridor. The passage led to a chamber that was darker and colder than the rest of her residence. The hum of technology filled the air, and faint green lights outlined a series of consoles and holographic displays. "This is your real base of operations," James said, his voice devoid of surprise. "The rest of the apartment is just a facade." "Perceptive, as always," Kera replied with a faint smile. "This is where I monitor council activities, and the factions vying for dominance." She gestured to a central display, where holograms of various alien species floated in a rotating circle. Each figure was labeled with intricate Vexian script. Kera tapped one image, and it expanded to show a triarch, a member of one of the Council's most influential species. "The Triarch Dominion," Kera explained. "They see humanity as a threat to their control. Your ingenuity, your unpredictability, it terrifies them. They're quietly rallying support to isolate Earth or worse." James crossed his arms, his gaze fixed on the display. And you're telling me this because? Because I don't work for the Triarchs, Kera said firmly. My people have their own interests, and we see potential in humanity. But even within the Vexian ranks, not everyone agrees. James nodded slowly, absorbing the information. Let me guess, the Council's factions aren't just political rivals. They're actively working against each other, and Earth is caught in the crossfire. Exactly, Kera confirmed. She tapped another display, revealing a map of the galaxy with Earth at its center. Red markers dotted the map, each one representing a potential threat to Earth's security. These are locations where covert operations are already targeting your planet. If you don't act soon, humanity won't survive its first decade in the Council. And what's your angle in all this? James asked, his tone sharp. Why risk exposing yourself to help us? Kera's expression softened, though her voice remained steady. Because if humanity falls, it won't stop there. The balance of power will shift, and the chaos that follows will consume us all. My people need stability, not another war. James stared at her, searching for any hint of deception. She was a master manipulator, but her words carried a ring of truth. Still, he wasn't ready to trust her completely. You said you monitor Council activities, James said, changing the subject. How much do you know about Earth's missing officers? Kera's eyes darkened. More than I'd like to admit. Commander Wong and Lieutenant Martinez were taken by a rogue faction operating outside Council oversight. They're being interrogated for information about your orbital defense grid. James's jaw tightened. He had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed sent a surge of anger through him. Do you know where they're being held? Kera hesitated, then nodded. I have leads. But extracting them will require cooperation, and trust. James smirked faintly. Trust is in short supply tonight. Then consider this a gesture of goodwill, Kera said, tapping another command into the console. A new hologram appeared, showing a facility on a barren moon. This is where they're being held. I can provide access codes and coordinates, but you'll need to act fast. The rogue faction is planning to move them within the next cycle. James studied the hologram, committing every detail to memory. Why not go after them yourself? Because if I do, it will expose my position within the Council, Kera said simply. I'm already taking a risk by sharing this with you. James exhaled, his mind racing. The mission was dangerous, but leaving Wong and Martinez in enemy hands wasn't an option. He turned to Kera, his expression hard. All right. I'll take the lead on this, but if this turns out to be a setup. It's not, Kera interrupted, her tone firm. We both know that if this alliance fails, neither of us will survive the fallout. The chamber fell silent, the hum of technology the only sound. James knew he was stepping into a minefield, but there was no turning back now. Whatever Kera's true motives, the stakes were too high to ignore her intel. Send me the data, James said finally. And be ready. If this goes sideways, I'll need an exit strategy. Kera nodded, her gaze steady. You'll have it. As James left the chamber, he couldn't shake the feeling that the game had only just begun. Kera's information was invaluable, but her motives remained a mystery. For now, he had no choice but to play along. Somewhere on a distant moon, his comrades were waiting, and time was running out. The shuttle hummed as it cut through the vast silence of space, its stealth systems masking it from detection. James Chen sat in the cockpit, reviewing the intel Kera had provided. The rogue faction's facility was located on Raction 5, a barren moon with no natural atmosphere. The structure was heavily fortified, its perimeter lined with automated turrets and sensor arrays. It wasn't an impenetrable fortress, but it came close. James's fingers hovered over the controls, adjusting his trajectory as the moon loomed closer. His mind replayed the details of Kera's holographic briefing. The facility's access codes, guard rotations, and schematics were precise, too precise. If her intel was genuine, she had extraordinary reach. If it wasn't, this mission would be his last. Trust is earned, James muttered to himself, double-checking the ship's systems. He wasn't ready to trust Kera fully, but the lives of Commander Wong and Lieutenant Martinez left him no choice. As the shuttle approached the facility, James activated the cloaking system. The ship's outline blurred and faded, blending seamlessly into the darkness. He guided the craft toward a blind spot in the facility's sensor grid, just as Kera had indicated. The margin for error was razor-thin. The shuttle touched down silently on the moon's surface, its landing gear sinking into fine, gray dust. James grabbed his gear, a compact plasma rifle, a multi-tool, and a device for hacking alien tech. He donned his exosuit, its oxygen supply hissing to life, and stepped out into the moon's desolation. The facility loomed ahead, its sharp angles gleaming under the harsh light of distant stars. James's visor displayed a HUD overlay, highlighting points of interest. The service hatch Kera had mentioned was 200 meters ahead, nestled between two sensor towers. He moved swiftly, his steps silent on the moon's low-gravity surface. A breach in the wall. Reaching the hatch, James crouched and examined the control panel. The alien interface pulsed faintly, its glyphs glowing a soft green. He inserted the hacking device, its screen displaying lines of code as it worked to bypass the lock. The process took only seconds, but every heartbeat felt like an eternity. The hatch opened with a soft hiss, and James slipped inside, sealing it behind him. He found himself in a maintenance corridor, its walls lined with exposed conduits and dim emergency lighting. The air smelled of ozone and recycled oxygen. Kera's voice echoed in his mind, the guards patrol in pairs. Avoid direct confrontation unless necessary. James crept forward, his steps muffled by the suit's adaptive soles. His visor displayed the facility's layout, overlaid with patrol patterns. The intel matched perfectly so far, though he still remained cautious. Ahead, the faint sound of footsteps reached his ears. He pressed himself against the wall as two alien guards passed, their weapons glinting in the low light. They spoke in hushed tones, their language a guttural mix of clicks and growls. James waited until they turned a corner before moving again. The rescue. After navigating a labyrinth of corridors, James reached the holding cells. A reinforced door blocked his path, its control panel glowing faintly. He pulled out the hacking device again, his fingers working quickly. The lock disengaged with a soft click, and the door slid open. Inside, Commander Wong and Lieutenant Martinez sat in separate cells, their uniforms tattered but intact. They looked up as James entered, their expressions shifting from surprise to relief. "Commander Chen," Wong said, his voice hoarse. "Took you long enough." "Good to see you too," James replied, stepping to the control console. "I trust you haven't gotten too comfortable." "Hardly," Martinez muttered. "They've been questioning us non-stop. Trying to get details on Earth's defenses." James entered the release codes, and the cell doors slid open. Wong and Martinez staggered out, their movements sluggish from confinement. James handed them water packs and spare oxygen filters. "Can you walk?" he asked. "We'll manage," Wong said, his tone resolute. "What's the plan?" "We get out the way I came in," James replied, scanning the room. "Stay close, and stay quiet." A close call. The three moved swiftly through the facility, retracing James's route. The corridors felt tighter now, the weight of possible discovery pressing on them. They reached the maintenance corridor without incident, but as they approached the service hatch, alarms blared. "Damn it," James hissed. He turned to Wong and Martinez. "Get to the hatch and seal it behind you. I'll cover you." The two officers hesitated but nodded, moving quickly toward the exit. James turned to face the corridor, his plasma rifle at the ready. The first guards appeared seconds later, their weapons raised. He fired with precision, blue bolts of plasma streaking through the air and dropping the guards before they could get a shot off. More footsteps echoed in the distance. James's visor highlighted incoming hostiles, their numbers growing. He moved backward, firing controlled bursts to suppress their advance. Just as he reached the hatch, Wong and Martinez pulled him through, sealing it behind him. The escape. Back outside, the trio sprinted across the moon's surface toward the cloaked shuttle. The alarms from the facility were muffled by the vacuum, but James knew reinforcements would soon follow. They climbed aboard the ship, and James powered it up, lifting off just as searchlights swept the area. The shuttle soared into the darkness, its cloaking system reactivating as it left the moon's gravity. James exhaled, the tension finally easing. Wong and Martinez slumped into their seats, their exhaustion evident. "You cut that close," Martinez said, her voice tinged with humor. James allowed himself a small smile. "Wouldn't be fun otherwise." As the shuttle entered open space, James sent a secure transmission to Kera. "Extraction successful. We need to talk." Her reply came almost instantly. "Understood. Rendezvous at the agreed coordinates." James leaned back, his mind already shifting to the next step. The rescue was only the beginning. The real battle was still ahead, and trust would remain a precious commodity in the dangerous game they were playing. The shuttle glided silently toward the agreed-upon rendezvous point, an unmarked asteroid at the edge of a dense nebula. James Chen sat in the cockpit, his fingers tapping against the console. Behind him, Commander Wong and Lieutenant Martinez rested in the cargo hold, their exhaustion palpable. The mission had been a success, but James's mind was elsewhere. Kera's response had been quick, too quick. He couldn't help but wonder if she had been monitoring the operation in real time. Trusting her was a gamble, but for now, it seemed he had no choice. As the asteroid came into view, James activated the cloaking system. The rocky surface was barren save for a single Vexian transport ship docked in a small alcove. Kera stood at the edge of the ship's ramp, her shimmering violet skin a stark contrast against the dark expanse of space. James landed the shuttle and disembarked, his plasma rifle slung over his shoulder. Kera waited, her expression unreadable. "You're punctual," she said, her voice calm but tinged with something deeper, curiosity or perhaps relief. "You don't leave much room for flexibility," James replied, keeping his tone neutral. "The extraction was successful, but now we need answers." Kera's gaze shifted past him to Wong and Martinez, who stepped out of the shuttle cautiously. "Your officers are safe. That's what matters." "It's a start," James said, stepping closer. "But you knew where they were being held. You knew the layout, the access codes, everything. Either you're incredibly well connected, or you've been playing a longer game." Kera sighed, her posture relaxing slightly. "Both are true. I had to gain their trust to gather that information, but I assure you, my loyalty lies with maintaining stability." James narrowed his eyes. "Convenient. And what about the rogue faction? What do they want with Earth?" Kera gestured for him to follow her into her ship. "I'll explain everything, but not here. The nebula provides cover, but it's not foolproof." The briefing. Inside Kera's ship, the atmosphere shifted. The walls were lined with glowing panels, each displaying data streams and holograms. The central console projected a 3D map of the Galactic Council's territories, with Earth highlighted in stark white. Red markers spread outward like cracks in glass. "The faction responsible for your officer's abduction operates outside the Council's authority," Kera began, her tone measured. "They call themselves the Sovereign Accord, a coalition of species disillusioned with the Council's rule. They see Earth as an opportunity, a wild card they can exploit." "Exploit how?" Wong asked, his voice hoarse but steady. "They're probing your defenses, testing your responses," Kera explained. If they find a weakness, they'll use it to destabilize Earth and justify a full-scale intervention. Their goal is to fracture the Council further, giving them the chaos they need to seize control. James folded his arms, his mind racing. And you? What's your role in all this? I'm trying to prevent that chaos, Kera said, meeting his gaze. Humanity's rise is disruptive, yes, but it's also an opportunity for balance. If Earth survives these trials, it could become a stabilizing force within the Council. And if we don't? Martinez asked, her tone sharp. Kera hesitated. Then the Accord will gain the upper hand, and the galaxy will descend into war. A plan of action. James paced the room, his thoughts aligning with the new information. The Sovereign Accord was a shadowy threat, but its motives were clear. Humanity's adaptability and ingenuity had made it a target, and their survival depended on countering this threat decisively. What's their next move? James asked, his voice steady. Kera tapped the console, bringing up a new hologram. It displayed a massive shipyard orbiting a gas giant in a distant system. This facility is their staging ground. They're building ships and weapons, preparing for a larger assault. If you want to stop them, you'll need to strike here. Wong frowned. A direct assault would be suicide. That facility will be heavily defended. It doesn't have to be direct, Kera said. A surgical strike to disable their production lines and destroy their supply cache would set them back significantly. I can provide schematics and infiltration routes. And what's your stake in this? James asked. Why risk exposing yourself to help us? Kera's gaze softened, though her voice remained firm. Because if the Accord succeeds, they won't stop with Earth. They'll turn their sights on other Council worlds, including mine. Stability is in everyone's interest. The tenuous alliance. The room fell silent as James weighed his options. Kera's intel had proven accurate so far, but trusting her completely was a risk. Still, the urgency of the situation left him with little choice. All right, James said finally. We'll take the fight to them, but this alliance only holds as long as you're honest with us. One betrayal, and it's over. Agreed, Kera said, extending her hand. We'll plan the operation together. Time is short. James shook her hand, the gesture marking the start of a fragile partnership. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but for now, their goals aligned. As Kera began outlining the details of the mission, James couldn't help but feel the weight of what was to come. Humanity's survival was on the line, and the stakes had never been higher. The massive shipyard orbiting the gas giant loomed ahead, its silhouette illuminated by the distant star. James Chen stood in the cockpit of the stealth frigate, his fingers gripping the controls tightly. Beside him, Kera monitored the holographic displays, her opal eyes darting between data streams. Behind them, Commander Wong and Lieutenant Martinez prepared for the operation in the small armory. This is your last chance to back out, Kera said, her tone neutral but her gaze intense. Once we're inside, there's no turning back. James smirked faintly. Backing out isn't in our vocabulary. Kera's lips twitched into a small smile before her expression hardened. The Accord won't expect an assault on their shipyard. They think Earth is still reeling from the abductions. That's our advantage. And what about the defenses? James asked, his eyes narrowing at the display of automated turrets and patrolling ships. They're formidable, Kera admitted. But their systems aren't designed to counter stealth infiltrations. As long as we stick to the plan, we'll have a chance. Chance doesn't inspire confidence, Wong muttered as he entered the cockpit, adjusting his armor. Martinez followed, her rifle slung over her shoulder. It's more than we usually get, James replied. Let's move. The infiltration. The frigate glided through the shipyard's perimeter, its cloaking systems masking its presence. Kera guided them toward a docking port on the station's underside, her fingers flying across the console. "This is as close as we can get without raising alarms," she said. "The docking bay is unguarded, but the interior corridors won't be." James nodded. "We stick to the plan. Disable their production lines, sabotage the weapons cache, and get out." The team disembarked swiftly, their boots silent on the metallic surface. Inside the station, the air was cold and sterile, the hum of machinery filling the silence. Kera's intel had been accurate so far, with the layout matching her schematics perfectly. As they moved deeper into the station, the first obstacle presented itself, a pair of alien guards patrolling a junction. James signaled for the team to halt, his hand raised in a silent command. Kera gestured to a vent overhead, and James nodded, motioning for Martinez to take point. Martinez climbed into the vent with practiced ease, her movements silent. Moments later, the guards crumpled to the ground, tranquilized by her precision shots. "Clear," she whispered through the comms. The sabotage. The production lines were a marvel of alien engineering, with robotic arms assembling sleek starships at an astonishing speed. The team planted explosive charges at critical points, careful to avoid detection. James set the timers, his hands steady despite the tension. 5 minutes, he said. "Let's move." The weapons cache was next. A massive storage area filled with crates of plasma rifles, missile pods, and other deadly technologies. Wong and Martinez worked quickly, rigging the supplies with incendiary devices while James and Kera stood watch. "What happens when this is over?" James asked quietly, his eyes scanning the corridor. Kera hesitated. "That depends on what you make of it. Humanity will have proven its strength, but it will also draw more attention. You'll need allies. Are you offering?" James asked, glancing at her. Kera met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "Perhaps. But for now, let's focus on surviving." The escape. As the last charge was set, alarms blared throughout the station. The team sprinted toward their extraction point, the sound of pursuing guards growing louder. The corridors echoed with shouted commands and the clatter of boots. "Looks like they noticed," Wong said dryly, firing a burst of plasma at the advancing guards. "Keep moving." James barked, his own weapon firing precise shots. They reached the docking bay just as the first explosion rocked the station. The team boarded the frigate, and James launched them into space, the station's alarm still ringing in his ears. Through the viewport, they watched as the shipyard erupted in a series of fiery detonations, the production lines and weapons cache obliterated. "Status?" James asked, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "Minimal pursuit," Kera replied, scanning the displays. "They're too busy dealing with the chaos." "Good," James said, leaning back in his seat. "That should buy us some time. A new beginning." The frigate docked at a remote outpost, far from prying eyes. The team disembarked, their exhaustion evident but their spirits high. The mission had been a success, and Earth was safer, for now. Kera stood apart from the group, her gaze fixed on the horizon. James approached her, his expression thoughtful. "You could have left us to handle this alone," he said. "Why didn't you?" Kera turned to him, her opal eyes shimmering. "Because humanity has potential. And because I believe in what you're fighting for." James nodded slowly. "If that's true, then maybe we can trust you. But trust has to be earned." "I understand," Kera said softly. "Perhaps, in time, you'll see that we're stronger together." As the sun rose over the distant outpost, James felt the weight of the mission lift slightly. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, he saw a glimmer of hope. Humanity had faced the odds and emerged victorious, proving once again that resilience and ingenuity were its greatest strengths.